Doors weren't just a thing you could access
here
by
to go to the
finding
options.
keys or
Let's
learning the
start
code
the
to a
adventure.
keypad, or by hacking the computer it was hooked up to, or by learning the password some
Standing
other
on
way,
this-
or by picking them. They were also physical, actual doors, which means you could just destroy them.
This is close! I can smell it from here!
The
Press
rocket
the
launcher is
space bar
nature's
to make this
lockpick.
jump.
That's so many options, and
Hey,
being able
look
to
at
just
those
break the
jump
door is
flowers.
believable
They're
and adds to
shooting
the
out
feeling of
magic
this being a
dust.
real place. You can
Press
destroy
the
doors in
space
Human
bar to
Revolution
make
if
this
you have
jump.
a grenade or a lot
Hey,
of bullets,
look,
though the
it's
scarcity of
Twilight.
resources makes
Let's
this a bit
go
of a
see what
waste.
she's
The
up
mechanic
to.
is implemented horribly. Locked doors don't show you how much health they have, or even
Great
indicate they
going.
can be damaged until they suddenly shatter into dust.
All right, we almost have it. Great
You can
going.
see a door's
We got
health
the
once
first-
it's unlocked, as in, once you can just open it and its health is totally irrelevant. You can
Hey,
also
Twilight,
break open vents,
don't forget
which,
to wait
let
for
me
us.
remind you, are literally never locked,
The
making
deer
it pointless
sure
to
are
ever
pretty.
do so. I bet most people didn't even notice you could do this, because who cares?
Watch
It never
for
serves
Twilight.
any
She'll be
purpose.
waiting to
Something I
help
thought was
us.
really funny was apartments in China have these sliding doors, and you can break them open easily. They're flimsy, you know? But when they're open, they become invincible.
Come on, let's follow Twilight.
This doesn't massively affect the gameplay, but it goes a long way in showing how little thought went into what
Another
used to be a
spinning
really good
emblem.
mechanic. Tons of things which were breakable in the original can't be now. Safes are indestructible, so you have to know the code
Whoops.
or hack.
A
And the
good
many
throw,
storage
but
units in
not
the
quite
game are
close
immune
enough.
to
Great
damage as
throw.
well. This
We'll be
reduces the
done in
player's
no time
available
at all.
options, in addition to making it
Alright,
impossible to
let's
even
keep
know if anything
going.
is destructible,
We're doing
because most of the
great.
time it isn't. The first time I tried to blow down a locked door,
Nearly.
the grenade
I
straight
think
up
the
didn't
wind
work
took
for
that,
some reason.
Mary.
And since I had no way of knowing
we
that was an
better baby
unrelated
magpie.
glitch, I
Way
assumed
to
locked
go.
doors couldn't be destroyed for ages until I tried again just to double check while I was writing the script for this
throw.
video. You know
We'll
what
be
would have
done in
been
no
useful?
time at all.
Showing the player the health of locked objects, or even saying
Alright,
when something's
let's keep
indestructible.
going.
There's a little game you
We're
could have
doing
taken
great.
inspiration from that did this. It's called Deus Ex. They just forgot to make half the stuff in the game respond to damage. Lockers, something players might want to be able to open a bunch of all at once by throwing
Looks
a grenade
like
into a
Twila's
room
ahead
to at
of
least
us.
save the trouble
Let's
of
find
manually
her.
opening and peeking around the horrible door of every single one, are also indestructible.
This bridge
One
needs
of the most
some
fun things
repair.
in Deus Ex was
But
running
I'm
low
sure
on
it's
picks
safe
and
enough
seeing
for
how many
us.
lockers you could open with your spare Gep rockets in Vandenberg without evaporating the office cat. There's
Looks
something
like Twyla
immensely
must
funny
have
and
used these
satisfying about
platforms.
tossing a grenade into
Let's
a room and
find
turning
her.
it into a festival of loot. This isn't a nitpick, this is a fundamental component of Deus Ex's player freedom and immersion that just doesn't work. You know, even when Invisible War was being Invisible War,
Let's
you could
hurry
still
and find
reliably
the
blow
flute
things open
so
with
we can help the
explosives. It wasn't a
princesses find
crapshoot
the
whether
vial
the
of
developers
elixir.
had bothered to make something break open like it should. Deus Ex's worst moments were when you had
Let's
no clever
follow
alternatives
Twyla
to the
and
more
see what
obvious
else she
choices,
finds.
like when a grate you could pick couldn't be destroyed by other means. But this is just how Human Revolution works. You need the lift heavy objects
Looks like
ability to move the
Twyla's
vending
run on
machine to
ahead.
get into this vent.
Let's go
You could say
find
it's
her.
a venting machine.
Press the
But hey,
space bar
maybe
to
you can
make
use
this
some
jump.
creativity and destroy the machine with a grenade. Vending machines are literally indestructible,
doing
didn't
great.
you know? The best you
Let's
can hope
keep
for is the
searching for the
physics blowing it
elixir.
clear of the vent. But for that to happen, the physics would have to work. Goodbye.
Meanwhile,
Hey, look at those cute
Deus
little
Ex made
rabbits.
almost everything breakable. Plants, boxes,
The
bodies.
boathouse. Oh, what a beautiful sight.
well, okay.
Trash sometimes spawns rats in it when you destroy it because it's New York City, baby! Smash all the vases and beakers on the floor you want. Take this, globalists!
Look, it's Twyla.
The game certainly is
She
much
may have
nicer
found the
looking than the
final
earlier
piece of the
games.
flute.
Humans don't look like Age of Mythology Prometheans with faces painted on them for one, but just generally, everything is so much more
Great
beautiful.
job.
I mean, look
That
at these
piece fits
ceilings.
perfectly.
At least a year
Try
of the game's
another
development
piece.
probably went into these. Holy cow, bro! I love this!
perfect
Top
fit.
10
We did
ceilings
it.
in history,
It's-
right behind the Sistine Chapel and another clever sounding thing. But when it comes to interaction,
We should
you know,
search through the archways.
game part of
We
this
have to
game,
find the
almost every
elixir.
prop or object is invincible
archway
set
will take
dressing.
us to the
These
crystal-
beakers, bulletproof. This Chinese food, immortal. This glass table, absorbing nearby humans
need
to
to
gain
collect
their
as many
power. The
magic
world feels
charms as
so
we can.
static, and it makes you feel even less like
The
you're really
crystal
interacting
streams
with
are
it. Lapicus
beautiful.
claims this is a selling point too. Look at this. What?
Quit screwing around.
Twyla
Are you
should
telling
be
me
around
your
here
game is better
somewhere.
because you can't throw plants at people? This is
looks like
cyberbullying.
we're
I've
heading
seen
the
people
right
say
way
this game
for
has
Kitty
amazing
Patch.
emergent gameplay. Like, oh wow, you can break open destructible walls if you don't have the wall punching ability. Yeah, that's nice. Although, if you don't have that ability, destructible walls don't noticeably glow, so it's
This
hard to
path
find
will
many
take
of
us-
them without already having the ability, at which point you're not going to waste grenades or ammunition on a
Let's
wall
keep
you can
searching.
just punch down.
We're sure
Actually,
to
the
find the
punchable wall
elixir.
augmentation opens up a
Great
bunch of
job.
extra questions.
We're
You can
doing
smash
great.
down concrete walls if they're slightly cracked, but you
We
can't
need to
use this
find a
ability
way
to
through these
punch open
crystals.
locked doors? You can't just break whatever locking mechanism
Great
is keeping this
going.
flimsy
Let's
door
see if
shut
the
with your
elixir is
mega
through
fists?
here.
Chaos Theory had a lockpicking
Use
minigame
the
that got a
arrow
bit
keys to
dull
guide
the way
Genevieve
hacking
around the
minigames did here,
crystals.
and that was on top of the hacking minigame they also had. But the designers also gave you the ability to loudly break the
These
lock and
crystals
open
are
it instantly.
beautiful. Good job.
People
We'll
who heard
find
the noise
elixir
or
in
saw
no
the broken
time at
lock would
all.
know someone
A
was here,
spinning
but if you don't
emblem.
want to pick that
There
lock,
must be a
you don't
task
have
waiting
to.
for us.
Picking it became a choice, one which felt more professional and stealthy. Wouldn't it be cool if that augmentation
All
also
right.
let you smash
Great
the locks off
jumping,
doors
Twyla.
and make a ton of noise or risk setting off a security system or something? It would be really cool to have an ability like that at your disposal, and I'm
You and
shocked the
Twyla
people who
make a
made a
great
game that
team.
literally did this didn't think of it.
Keep
It would
going.
automatically
We
give you a
have to
lot
find
more
the
to do with
elixir.
this power and save on having to think of more
You and
places to put
Twyla are
punchable walls,
amazing.
which they were
You're
really
doing so
running low on
well.
towards the end. Something else really bugs me about these levels. I spent a long time trying to put my finger on it, but it turns out the answer was floating right in front of my face the entire time, so I'm
This
not
is
sure
going
how
to
I
be
missed
an
it. Oh,
awesome
did you think I
dance
forgot
show.
about the quest markers? How could I?
Way to go.
How could
A
anyone? Quest
fantastic
markers are
dance
annoying when they're
move.
off in the corner, but it turns out it
Good
could have been
choice.
worse. They could have been
That sure
unconstrained.
is a
They could have
pretty
just
dance.
no, leave me alone. They didn't seem to consider how it would look if you had multiple side quests happening at once, or if you were at a stage in a side quest with multiple objectives, because oh boy, does that door need me to know every side quest and individual component each side quest has is outside it. There's one side quest where you have to neutralize an entire apartment full of gangsters. Now they're localized to a single small apartment, so you only need one quest marker for that, right? I have genuinely died in this game because I couldn't see a guy behind a pile of his buddy's quest markers. Yeah, so the game is a little desperate to make sure players don't miss what they're supposed to be doing, to the point that it's pretty distracting, ironically. They expect you to toggle off the markers for quests you aren't doing at the exact moment. And yeah, sure, this helps for that if you don't mind doing one thing at a time, but the
Way to
real
go.
issue is making a game which has a method of pointing the player directly towards their required destination
We
inspires
should
really
search the-
lazy design, because now the levels don't have to make sense to players as they
This
navigate,
archway will
because
take
they've
us
got
to
a
the
thing telling them
crystals.
where to go. If you've played the game, you'll know that even though the markers are really distracting, you have to leave them on because there's no other way of
We need
finding
to
these
collect as
quests.
many
Detroit
magic
is an
charms as
unintuitive
we
area to
can.
explore. It's a ton of very similar streets connecting to other very
Let's
similar
keep
streets, and when
going.
it's not those
We have to
streets, it's
find the
identical
vial of
apartment
elixir.
buildings, which granted is realistic to most urban
There's
cities,
so
but
many
that's not how
crystals.
games ought to
Twyla
work.
could be
New York in
anywhere.
Deus Ex had character and presence. It was designed to be experienced by a
Looks like
player
we're
who
heading
didn't have
the
it
right way
memorized
for
or know
Lily Lee
exactly where
Throw.
to go. You enter and you're like,
This
where
path
am
will
I?
take us-
And you look around and you know where you are because every part of the level looks different and things are really well signposted. Literally in some cases. I love the place everyone calls the Ton Hotel
We
is
need
really
to
the
find a
Hilton
way
Hotel,
through
but the
these
sign's
crystals.
broken. It's memorable and makes the
Let's
hotel
keep
into an obvious
searching.
landmark
We're
you can
sure
use to
to find the
navigate.
elixir.
If you have to find Adam Jensen's
Excellent.
apartment off in the
Head for the
corner of the
gems.
map
Head for
without
the
quest
gems.
markers telling you exactly where it is, you're screwed. If you try to stop and get your bearings by looking around, you'll never get anywhere. Detroit is a maze you need a GPS to traverse. Quests are not designed to be doable with the markers turned off.
Nice
You'd have to
work.
manually check every single back alley to find the specific
Boss is
one with
coming.
the guy you
Collect
need
the
to talk to for the current
Collect the
quest,
gems.
especially when the guy has moved since the last time you talked to him for no reason. Conversely, I was feeling clever when I wrote this sentence, this also means the player is never expected or challenged
good
to
watch
pay
out for the
attention.
princesses.
Deus Ex has an optional
may have
secret
found the
base in the
vial of
sewers the first
elixir.
time you get to New York that's a clever setup for
Keep
some of the
going.
future plot.
We're doing
Finding it
so
requires looking
well.
around yourself
We'll
or
find
talking
the
to a
elixir
character
in
you meet in
no
another
time.
optional area
Come
and
on,
hearing him
let's
mention
head
the
for the
base in the
spinning
sewers
emblem.
and choosing
Be
to
sure to
check it
have a
out.
cat's
Nothing
quick
gets
tip.
plopped on your screen, no arrow on your mini-map, just good old-fashioned detective work. You feel
Alright,
like a spy
good
on the trail of a
throwing.
conspiracy,
Good
and on a
throw.
deeper
We'll
level,
have the
your
bridge
objective is
built
to
in
find
no
a
time
generator
at
the
all.
terrorists have hidden.
Excellent
Finding it is the
throwing.
point, asking around, exploring, bothering to check out side content and meet other characters who might come in handy later. You can get on the rooftops of buildings and physically see the building the NSF are clearly trying to defend. This is the point of this section. It's why the game feels so free and personal despite being, at its heart, pretty linear. DXHR feels exactly as linear as it is. In every single moment, it is telling you exactly where you're going next, and you're following it. When you have to do the equivalent quest, shutting down a signal the bad guys are generating, you know precisely where it is at all times. There is no mystery, no search. Pritchard gives you a quest marker and you walk to it. Hell, you could have just got your pilot to drop you off right there and save you the trouble. And when you do turn it off, she actually does turn up to take you to the next area, which is a little insulting. I'm sure there's a plot contrivance, but in the original game, the point was that you didn't know exactly where it was, so you didn't feel like you had your time wasted when an aircraft came to pick you up after you found it. Quest markers are not an alternative to level design. There are a few brief sections in the game where they're switched off, so the game has to be designed to make the player do their own thinking and exploring, and the game's fun factor instantly skyrockets. There's a base where your signal is jammed or whatever, so you have to manually find the scientist you're looking for, and it's easily the best level in the game to navigate. Each of the buildings has a completely different shape and feel, unique designs and visual cues. The outside area is built so it's easy to know where you are relative to everything. It's really cool. 5 minutes in, you find the signal jammer and turn it off, and the game is bullshit again. Now you know exactly where to go, and suddenly you're not really exploring anymore. This is the one section in the game where turning off the quest markers actually works really well, so at least it's a good time if you keep the markers turned off. It kinda sucks that almost every game that heavily relies on these markers inevitably has a tiny, really cool segment that turns them off, where the level design has to account for them being turned off, and everything gets so much better. Instead of being an interesting take on the central mechanics, it ends up being a brief foray into better mechanics you don't get anywhere else, and now the player knows exactly what they're missing the rest of the time. There's an oversight in the PC version that's kind of funny, but also prevents the markers from at least getting better with age. The game was designed to look good at 720p on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360. When Nixes were creating the PC port, and God bless them, otherwise they did a fantastic job, someone made the UI not scale with resolution. This means at higher resolutions like 1080p, 1440p, and 4K if you're an idiot who owns a 4K screen, the UI gets increasingly harder to see and read. But for some godforsaken reason, the objective markers, and only the objective markers, do scale. So even though everything else is so small, people watching this video on their phone won't be able to read the in-game subtitles. Don't blame me, that's just how the game looks at 1440p. The quest markers are still blasting your head off and messing with the visuals of an otherwise still beautiful game. Incidentally, if you get the chip replacement, the glitchy health bar and ammo counter you get during the boss battle are scaled, so you can briefly see just how readable the game could have been. You know how older video game cities were always a lot smaller than a real city would be because of hardware limitations or what have you? It turns out that was a blessing in disguise. New York, Hong Kong, and Paris felt big, but not so big that getting around was annoying. Because you know what's not that fun? Trying to get around a big city on foot.
We have to keep on dancing if we're going to save Father.
Hey.
All right, dancing is so much fun.
What's up, dude? You lost or something?
The new, realistically big Detroit and Henshaw levels have tons of places that serve no actual gameplay purpose whatsoever, but the level has to be big because cities are big. The game does create a very nice sense of mood with this, though. The designers came up with hundreds of brands and logos to populate their future with. There's some genuine creativity on display here, but these levels aren't used in ways that benefit from this. You aren't milling around the cool environment, making small talk with locals, having unique encounters as you traverse the hustle and bustle of the city. It's window dressing as you follow a quest marker to the places the gameplay happens. JC Denton's walk speed wasn't super fast by the first-person shooter standards of the time, but the small and dense levels packed with stuff to do and secrets to find made the pace feel brisk. Adam feels significantly slower than JC, especially in the much larger cities. You can sprint for 2 seconds, that's not a joke, 2 seconds, and then it has to recharge.
This Dance Star show will look beautiful.
They made running shit on purpose so you had more stuff to put praxis points into. I mean, it's not a surprise he's going so slow if he's carrying so much stuff everywhere in his arms. Pathologic made you walk for hours deliberately as a form of punishment for the player. The game was trying to hurt you and make you question what you were doing with your time. Human Revolution is trying to be a fun cyberpunk action RPG, so I don't think they should be aiming for the same effect. The atmosphere and art design deserve some credit here, though. This is some of the most impressive, really boring walking back and forth between objectives I've done in my life, and I'm an expert on those. This is one of the best realized worlds in the history of video games. A decade later, the graphics hold up incredibly well because good visual design just doesn't age. But you're traversing it to do the same hacking minigame every 5 feet, to unlock safes with a negligible amount of money in them, which you can't even spend because the store only had 10 of the bullets you want. This is why this game is so difficult to analyze without going way overboard and making an unwatchably long video. All the pieces of an excellent game are right here. They even made the skylight you could have got in through in a better version of the game, but they don't stick the landing. Instead, the game is merely fine. The stealth is fun, the combat is good, and the levels are okay, but don't encourage creativity. And it's easy to get bored because the game never asks that much of you. I joked before about people quitting because of the hacking minigame, but more seriously, it's probably because halfway through there aren't even many new levels to keep things fresh. You instead go to Detroit and Hengshire all over again, with even less to see this time. The first visits to these locations have an okay amount of side quests, about as many as the original did for its city-type locations. The second visit to Detroit has one side quest, with a second one if you completed another side quest during the first visit. And I mean fully completed. If you forgot to read the 3 emails you got sent at the end of the first half of the quest before you left for China hours ago, you can never start the second half once you get back. The second visit to China is so devoid of new material, the game lies and says there are more side missions than there actually are. There's 2, one from this guy and one from this lady, but the game pretends there's a third quest. The other quest, a matter of discretion, is given to you by another character. It's to talk to this lady, who then gives you the second quest.
Are you the man Mr. Darrow sent?
A guy calls you on the telephone and gives you the quest to get the other quest, so it feels like you're doing more quests. There are some really ambitious ideas for a cyberpunk world in here, saddled with an engine and hardware generation that didn't match that ambition. The simplified levels remind me a lot of the PS2 version of the original game, which was good, but a bit more stripped down and missing the expansiveness and complexity that made the PC version quite so special. I'd compare the level design to Invisible Wars, but even I'm not that mean. Actually, no, Invisible War put enemies in the vents to punish you for thinking they were an easy solution, so its level design is objectively better. Next chapter.
Goodbye.
All right, a spinning emblem. We could find a
I talked to the chairman. We discussed regime change for New Cairo.
You sure have a steady hand.
The story of the original Deus Ex was a complete mess. In a good way, though. It's part of what makes it amazing. But it's also why making another one is like trying to solve the trolley problem while trapped inside the trolley. It was set in 2052 in a world that's very different from ours, or was different in the year 2000. Many of the game's scariest predictions turned out to be true. My favorite games keep doing that.
Let it spill over to the schools.
We'll reach the rainbow in no time at all.
There's a dozen factions with their own agendas, all fighting for supremacy, uneasy alliances, ancient organizations, revolutionary groups, secret bases underneath other secret bases, corporate conspiracies, and even greasels.
This is going to be an awesome dance show. Good choice. You're going to make a
Despite discussing important ideas like the value of democracy and the human need to feel witnessed by a god, and how the rich have manipulated the system so workers pay more in taxes than their boss, the writing still manages to be fun.
Get out! I got a bomb!
A bomb's a bad choice for close-range combat.
Deus Ex knows that a world where every conspiracy turned out to be true would be a little bit silly.
Your hand might have slipped.
No, I wanted orange. It gave me lemon lime. It's the maintenance man. He knows I like orange.
So you think the staff has some kind of plot?
Yes, they do that on purpose.
So instead of pretending to be the darkest and most seriousest story ever, it's more like an X-Files box set, raising some important ideas and themes, but with a sense of humor about it.
You take another step forward, and here I am again. Like your own reflection repeated in a hall of mirrors. That makes me one ugly son of a bitch.
The game has multiple endings, all three of which have different implications for the future of the world. You can let things continue as normal, but with a slightly more benevolent dictatorship in place, run by you and that guy who loves betraying people. I'm sure it'll all work out fine. Wait, that's not a good-sounding Paradise Lost quote. Oh shit, are we the baddies? Or you can shut off all advanced information technology and plunge the world into a new dark age where YouTubers have to provide something of value to society. Or you can fuse with an advanced AI and become a kind of all-knowing god from the machine. Hey look, it's the title. But now the question is, how the hell do you make another one of these? Do you decide on one ending being canon and hope for the best? Do you ask for a player's save file and try to react to their choices and retcon all the big ones because you can't be bothered? Or do you embody the spirit of Deus Ex's madness and push it even further and put jet boosters on the trolley? Enter Deus Ex Invisible War, the game equivalent of trying to replace sleep with your ADHD medication. Which ending is canon? All of them. At once, JC Denton fused with an advanced AI and became a godlike, hyper-intelligent super being, but also, all the technology in the world shut off, which kind of messed with his plans, but also, the fucking Illuminati is still running around, but also, there's even more Greasels now! Set 20 years after the most confusing day in the world, Invisible War tries to follow up on the original with intriguing new perspectives and ironic twists, and tries to tell a new story of its own with new characters while it's at it. Then those two things smash into each other and create the most fascinating mess of a story ever conceived. It's less X-Files box set and more trying to figure out the plot of X-Files from Fox Mulder Best Moments compilation number 11.
Let's keep searching.
How is this in part 11? This is at least a number 4. I love this game. Is it good? I don't know. But it's definitely the most. This game has 4 radically different endings that each permanently alter the world even more than the originals did, ranging from wiping out almost all life to uniting human consciousness in a new way of being. So, one question, how do you make a sequel to this? If someone asks you to make Deus Ex 3, as it was tentatively titled in its early teasers, they're trying to trick you into destroying your career. So, what do? You make a prequel. Oh no! Prequels can be great, but they often have to carry a lot of excess baggage. This is all the stuff we didn't need to see to enjoy the original, so seeing it is by definition kind of unnecessary. You know his name, you know his methods, and this February, you learn that at some point he started doing those things. Holy shit, this movie's fucking terrible. And in interactive media, this can be even worse, because now your interaction is being limited by what's supposed to
You're going
next.
to make a wonderful dance show.
You created a time
Great
paradox.
choice.
Okay, in context, that's kind of meant as a joke. Let's do a real example. Stalker Shadow of Chernobyl began with the marked one on the battle bus with the quest to down Strelok.
Taser?
So yeah, prequels are something you generally want to avoid unless you've got a really good idea for it. But as we've established, Eidos Montreal didn't really have much of a choice. They're kind of between a rock and a hard place here. I mean, I guess they could do a reboot, but rebooting the franchise kind of isn't ideal either. You really should never do one of those, Eidos Montreal. Oh no! Given that all of the options were kind of bad, it does beg the question, why make a Deus Ex game at all, apart from brand recognition? Well, it might shock you, but the answer is brand recognition. Did you ever wonder why the next Prey was called Prey and not, I don't know, New Space Game, even though it's nothing like Prey? God, these names are confusing. It's because the money men at Bethesda or Eidos Square Enix aren't going to spend millions of dollars and years of dev time on an ambitious, risk-taking original idea unless it's got a vaguely bankable name.
We already had in mind the kind of game we were making, and then Bethesda said, hey, what about using this name?
Hey, why don't you call it Prey, guys? We killed the company that was making the original Prey 2, even though it was basically finished because they wouldn't let us buy them. That's a true story. Look it up. So now we have this name lying around. Prey 2017's great, don't get me wrong, and the devs had a lot of creative freedom with it, except for the name.
That game had to be
spinning emblem.
This is why, at least in the AAA gaming space, original big-budget games are surprisingly rare, but you can expect endless sequels, prequels, reboots, and remasters of popular existing properties until you're cold in your grave. What have you done?
We collected
What does he look? Because when you're talking years of work and tens of millions of state-subsidized subsidized Canadian fun bucks, you need to provide at least some proof of a return on investment. And the best way to do that is to be called famous thing, more shit. Maybe none of this is true and the creators really wanted to specifically make the next Deus Ex game, but if that's the case, I think it was a poor choice. You see, now you have to design your game around dodging the complaints of losers who care about the Deus Ex timeline. Losers like me prepare to be destroyed. What I'm getting at is the story is trying to be unique and original, but also very self-conscious about looking like it definitely will lead into Deus Ex maybe someday. This approach damages both the game's ability to relate to the other games and its ability to tell the original story it clearly desperately wants to. Before you can even explore the story that is here, you have to excavate it from under a pile of distracting references to the original. For example, J.C. Denton's boss, Joseph Manderley, is referenced like a dozen times throughout the plot, like he's a major player directly involved with the important stuff you're dealing with.
We've been compromised.
This Dance Star show will look beautiful.
But somebody got to the corpse before we did.
Like, this guy's so important, he's getting name-dropped in the pre-rendered cutscenes by bosses. What would an ordinary player think this is setting up?
You the home sec guy I was ordered to wait for? Tell Manderley I didn't get the memo until I was halfway through the autopsy.
Maybe the story that you're playing? Right?
Someone in the government, a man named Manderley, ordered that a specially appointed medical examiner perform the autopsy.
So you think, I get it, this guy's a big deal. Maybe we meet or even fight him later? No, they eventually just stop mentioning him. If you were trying to figure out what was up with Manderley or find him, you were wasting your time. This isn't part of the story. This was the game's attempt to tie itself into the series more. But they've gone about it in a way that makes the actual story you're trying to follow really annoying, because it's full of stuff you think you're supposed to pay attention to that turns out to be fan service and doesn't go anywhere. I'm sure they were trying to be subtle about it so their own story had room to breathe. In fact, here's Mary Demal saying that.
Well, the good thing about doing the prequel is that if you haven't played the game before, you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to suddenly become like, oh, what's going on?
I think she had the right idea here. This was a story that first and foremost needed to work on its own merits. But there is frankly too much Deus Ex 1 stuff in here for that to happen. The first thing you see in the game, in the opening, is this guy, Bob Page, the antagonist of Deus Ex 1, and also the first guy you see in the opening of that game too. You need to know Bob Page is behind this for some reason, even though he never appears in the actual game. He turns up after the credits.
Looking forward to seeing the hybrid project up close, Mr. Page.
But please, call me
Keep
Bob.
going.
This shot in the post-credits scene is reused from the opening too. I don't know whether to be annoyed how lazy this was or glad they didn't waste too much effort on something so unnecessary. People who are playing this first, and for a lot of people this was their introduction to the series, will spend the entire game wondering who the hell that guy the intro focused on was. And they will never get an answer. I love when my first experience of a series is a bunch of shit I can't possibly understand. There's a bit during the walk and talk a few minutes later where a guy drops a reference to Page Industries, and this one's kinda cute. Players who knew what Page Industries was would get it, and players who didn't could write it off as world building and office banter. This subtlety would have worked really well, but you've already blown past subtle references to Bob Page when you began the game with a 1.5-minute intro starring Bob Page, even though he's not even in the game. I'm a little paged out, buddy. The opening, ending, and quite a lot in between is an extended reminder of a different story you could be playing instead. People who know who Lucius De Beers is aren't gonna clap their hands like a circus seal when they see his name turn up, and people who don't are gonna wonder why they keep reading emails about people they don't know who don't turn up in the story. All these problems come to a head in Where Else? The pre-order DLC. If you got the Explosive Mission Pack, at one point you literally take a break from the story you're playing to help rescue a main character you've never met before, to help them get onto a boat to the place they need to be 20 years later. The most relevant interaction Adam Jensen has with the plot of Deus Ex 1 is to help a guy catch his bus. During the escape sequence with the bomb, you see him get on his boat, the Tracer. Wow, how long did that take you? But rescuing Tong was pre-order content a majority of players didn't get to do, and since this cutscene is pre-rendered and happens the same way no matter what, there isn't an alternative version for if you didn't get the Rescue Tong mission. So most players' experience of this element of the story is some guy they've never seen before turns up for 5 seconds, waves at Adam like you're supposed to know who he is, and people who haven't played the original are left asking,
wait,
Who are you?
Guess you
Keep
should have
going.
pre-ordered from
We're
GameStop.
doing so well.
I feel bad making this criticism because, for the reasons we've explored, it's not like they had much of a choice in making their project have to also work as a prequel, so criticizing how they handled it is just kicking someone while they're down, which in Quebec I think they would call a folks pass. But Deus Ex is one of the best stories in the history of gaming, and Human Revolution isn't doing its own story any favors by reminding fans of the much better story they actually liked. So when the story isn't trying to shoehorn in confusing and unnecessary references to the first game, what is the story of this one actually about?
Let's keep going. We have to find the vial of elixir.
Sorry, there's a typo there. Now, since it's a video game, we're grading on a really weirdly shaped curve here. They won an award for the writing at the Canadian Video Game Awards that year, beating out other games like Assassin's Creed Revelations and Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine. Wow, what stiff competition. This game's story is not great, but also much better than most other video games. By such a wide margin, it feels wrong criticizing it too hard. The performances are fantastic. Well, mostly. Someone's not coming back for the sequel, and there's some solid comedy in there too. There's a fantastic part where you're supposed to tell a code phrase to a guy and you can just get it wrong on purpose.
Something, Death and Taxes, Confucius.
What? Wait,
we have to keep on dancing if we're going to save Father.
You were supposed to say, death and life have the determined appointments. Then I say,
keep
riches
dancing.
and honor depend upon heaven.
Okay. Death and life have their determined appointments.
Riches and
Way to go!
You don't even fail the mission for doing this. It's just cool. And there's some neat setup and payoff, like, oh, see this guy showing his arm off to the camera to make sure you see it? That arm is going to turn out to be important 3/4 of the game from now. There's nothing wrong with the writing in, say, the cutscenes, even if they take away some player control. The issue is that all of this writing is happening around a badly written central plot. Deus Ex Human Revolution is centrally about the issue of augmentation and whether it's good or not.
Deus Ex Human Revolution centers around the use of mechanical augmentations and how this technology has spread through the world and how it is affecting the world.
It's not that the world is full of stuff, but the main focus is augmentation. It's that the world is full of people discussing augmentation and nothing else, unless they're referencing Deus Ex 1. Almost everyone in the universe of Human Revolution has an opinion about whether having robot arms is good or the death knell of the human soul.
What's all the fuss about this augmentation technology?
What are you looking at, pal? Scanning me with those metal eyes of yours?
No offense, but if it were up to me, this place would have a no-arg
Let's head for the
policy.
archways. That
Hope
way
you
we can
enjoy
find
those
the elixir
fancy
and
hands of
save
yours,
the king.
because in less than a year they'll be worthless.
The rote mechanical insistence on covering one and only one topic makes the world strangely uncanny.
Have you
Twilight
seen
has
the neural
already found a
enhancements
way
they're coming
through
up
the
with these
gates.
days?
Let's see
How far
if we
are they
can
gonna go?
find her. Hey,
In his apartment building, Adam Jensen overhears a fight in another room. A man has caught his wife cheating. It's tense and upsetting, and for a brief moment, it feels like you're in a world with a bunch of different stories happening in it. Then it turns out she cheated because they're both augmented.
I guess I wanted to be reminded of what it
Let's
was
keep
to do
searching.
someone.
We're sure to find the elixir.
You were the one who wanted us to get enhanced. Now you're saying we're not normal anymore. Well, I'll try not to touch you too often with my cold, dead metal hand. Okay?
I'm sad about my metal hand. That's the story in a nutshell. Granted, it's not quite as iconic as I never asked for this. Purity First's motivations are that they don't like augmentations because they pollute the human body. They hate them for this vague reason so much they're willing to break into buildings, take hostages, kill them with gas, and so on. They dress evocative of Christian monks with the prayer rope and everything, and wear a band over their arms with their group's logo on it. Wow, I wonder what this is meant to remind people of.
Vial of elixir.
He asked me. Kept calling me a bigot.
He called me a bigot, so I murdered him. You see, when you zoom in really closely on one aspect of your setting, you obscure the big picture in ways that make it less interesting than if it was part of the whole. Take Detroit, the city the American portions of the game are set in. Detroit, historically, is a city that was once prosperous, then went through a major decline as a result of the auto industry shipping most of the work to places that didn't have strong unions, so they could pay them less. People in poorer countries, and eventually robots in poorer countries, make the cars they used to make in Detroit. There was also redlining, which effectively denied black Detroiters the opportunities afforded by stable home ownership or being able to open new businesses of their own, which helped to ensure the economy had even less chance of recovering. And the thing is, the economic effects of historic racism don't go away overnight. When we invent cures for cancer or improved human body parts that don't get sick or let us run faster or jump higher or think harder, people from economically disadvantaged groups will have the least access. The rich will be building themselves better and the poor will not. Meanwhile, if augmentation becomes necessary for certain jobs, like say truck drivers can get their brains augmented so they can drive all night without traditional need for sleep, that might become the expected norm for the job. People might only hire drivers who don't need breaks to sleep. Wage slavery would take on even more physical connotations. You could make a game about that idea. And this stuff is discussed at least briefly during the game. Several homeless NPCs talk about how they lost their jobs for refusing to be augmented, and several other NPCs have serious job anxiety, or remark on how rich Adam must be to be so augmented.
Listen, just because you have money doesn't make you better than me.
The Henshaw level has a whole side quest covering sex workers being forcibly augmented, not just to serve clients, but because it means they won't be able to quit without losing access to the anti-rejection drugs you have to take for life once you get an augmentation. Human Revolution strays dangerously close to making actual real social commentary here. In the last level, lots of the construction workers have tools where their arms would be. I'm gonna go ahead and call this body horror. This is what the future might do to working people. But did you see how deep I had to dig to pull out that point just now? This game is supposed to be about human augmentation and its effect on the world, but I had to talk about specific random NPCs and the one side quest that really went into it, and stare at random enemies in the last level to find some kind of relevant observation. If anything about this game's story is lacking, is how it's swimming in an ocean of meaningful questions and points, but the actual plot blows past it all to be about terrorists who hate orgs and org lovers and the bad men who kidnapped your girlfriend. Let's take another look at some of Purity First's literature they leave strewn around the office they broke into. This stuff about physical limitations being human and not changing the body is just bullshit. These fuckers are against pacemakers. They don't have a valuable point to make here. And that's okay. Purity First are deliberately written and presented in the game as misguided radicals, which isn't necessarily a bad choice, but it does mean this group doesn't have anything interesting to say. The NSF are a great faction in the first game because their perspective is genuinely interesting, at least partially valid, and everything their leaders say is just fucking true. There's a reason every line this guy speaks is iconic. You switch sides and work with these guys partway through, and it works here because they were never presented as the dumbest boys in the world. But yeah, sure, hearing aids are immoral. Nice one, buddy. Say hi to Ted in prison for me. But here's the real shitter, right? In between these two statements is a really interesting one. This one actually reaches for an important point. It comes close to saying what a lot of people say right now about modern technology, like electric cars or self-driving cars or space rockets. Namely that even if they work, they're not the thing humanity needs right now. And wasting resources on them at a time like this while so many real problems go unsolved is a tragedy history won't look back on kindly, if there even are any historians left in 50 years. Purity First could easily have been written as a principled faction and represented a tangible perspective, but instead any of their justifiable motivations are relegated to the back page of a PDF and they're shooting people for calling them racist. You could have, for example, made them a group with a cohesive ideology. Like, what if they were anti-augmentation specifically because they saw the impact it would have on working people who couldn't afford them, or who would be expected to get them to keep their jobs? What if they weren't even anti-augmentation per se, and this break-in was a cover to steal for people who need access to augmentations but can't afford them? Zeke Sanders is established as a veteran. He belongs to a group that maybe could do with access to replacement limbs. There were so many compelling ways of writing this group, but instead they went with the Nazi sash-wearing purity terrorist gang.
He thinks we're breaking the law. Shut up! All you body polluters break laws. You're all the same.
I don't like augmentations because I'm the bad guy. Ah! Even though there's plenty room to discuss augmentation in a nuanced way, it's instead often used as a stand-in for other real-world issues. There's newspaper articles about how an augmented black woman has had to deal with bigotry, not just for her race, but now also for being augmented. First racism, and now robot arms. People are coming up with special new slurs for augmented people. Mechs, clanks, cogs, chrome boy. Chrome boy?
Chrome boy.
Chrome boy. Hansers? They put more creativity into clever new terms for cyber cyber racism than they did into actually talking about the issues that would really come into play if human augmentation becomes available. It feels a bit like they're adding augmentation on top of these other things, like racism, abortion, drug abuse, or prostitution, in order to bring additional depth to their central theme. It's a little gross at times. You don't need an abortion poster to make transhumanism look like a topical idea. I just think this is unnecessary and crass. The Hengshar side quest deserves special attention here. The idea of forcing sex workers to need an anti-rejection drug is a little too close to one-to-one substitution for a real problem. Sex workers being addicted, often forcefully, to drugs as a means of control. Like, making it so the drug they need is because of an augmentation is just crowbarring your silly sci-fi concept into an already existing real problem. The game isn't using this sequence as a way of saying anything about the sex industry, beyond that it's bad that trafficking happens, which, okay, glad we're on the same page, and it's not saying anything about augmentation except that I guess it might add to an already existing form of exploitation. It's here so you can punch 3 guys and save a lady, and she can go, wow, you saved me, and then she evaporates. We fade to black and she ceases to exist. Did we just solve sex trafficking? And we have to talk a little about how prostitution is used in the game. Sex workers are a large presence in both main hubs, and it feels like this was done to make a point about how bad things are getting. Like, the writers wanted to write a dystopian future, and their minds instantly went to, there's a lot of prostitutes everywhere. I'm curious if the writers spoke to any sex workers and asked them how they felt about being used as a signifier for societal collapse. This problem is bigger than human revolution, obviously. Prostitutes, and more specifically Asian robo-prostitutes, have been a fixture of cyberpunk fiction since its inception. These stories have always leaned on combining the mystery of future technology with the exoticism of foreign cultures. We certainly shouldn't interrogate the Orientalism inherent in that trope.
Hey, Malik, drop me off at the cyber brothel, please. I need to look for key cards.
The game is ham-fisted in how it talks about augmentations because, when it comes down to it, the central question it decided to focus on, whether we should legislate human augmentation or not, just isn't as complicated as it might have seemed when they came up with it. Putting aside the questions about what it means to be human, the more tangible questions on the topic are a bit simpler. For example, if companies started developing prosthetic arms that can shoot explosives and kill everyone in an immediate radius, should there be regulations on who can have those? Yeah, they should probably ban the war crime blaster before the NRA decide it's every toddler's God-given right to bear robot arms. In this footage, I was trying to turn invisible and accidentally hit the button right next to it and fat-fingered my way into 12 consecutive life sentences. Pause the video and leave a comment if you think the government shouldn't regulate this. In order to make the question seem more complicated, the game draws zero distinction between this and the types of theoretical augmentation we can all agree are great. Advanced prosthetics that recreate actual sensory information the way a hand would. Enabling people who have lost limbs to completely replace them. Fully functioning eye replacements. Things like that would be magical for a lot of people. The anti-augmentation groups are written to hate those too.
Too much power can make you do terrible things, Mr. Jensen.
Zeke Sanders ripped out his prosthetic eye because he hates augmentations that much. They're against all augmentations for pseudo-philosophical reasons to do with changing the core of humanity. We can save people from illnesses, amputation, disfigurement, disability, but at what cost? Ooh.
Augmentations help a lot of people, Doc. Handicapped, war vets.
Yes, but at what cost?
I bet you thought I was joking, didn't you? No, they actually say that. Now, statistically, almost half the people watching this are wearing glasses or contact lenses like me. Many of you are watching this on the phone they also use whenever they need to check for information on almost any topic. We've already been supplementing our bodies and minds with technology for so long we've almost forgotten we're doing it. By surpassing our human limits, we're destroying our humanity, defeating the purpose of life. Oh my god, you're totally right. We need to rid the world of people who supplement their bodies with... Are those glasses? So your options in Human Revolution are between these jokers who are anti-medicine because, ooh, what if life-saving surgery takes away some of your soul? Several of which turn out to be the fucking Illuminati, and we can't let the government shut us down, Adam. Break into a police station for me. Also, don't forget, we installed the secret explosion nightmare cannon in your body. Check this shit out. Yeehaw!
This place is
The pro-regulation groups have to be written to be extremely stupid and working for the bad guys because otherwise there's no contest. The issue is made all or nothing. Corporations corporations manufacturing concealed carry buster swords versus big government trying to ban, what, the concept of prosthesis? Because that's the only way to turn the central focus of the game into something resembling a debate. Human Revolution feels like its heart is in the right place, but it's afraid to say too much. So instead you get this really weak stuff like, hey, maybe the military-industrial complex is bad.
You're right. The teacher would just love having one of those things.
Yeah, if you think about it, making weapons isn't as good for the world as making medicine. Wow! Later, when riots start happening in Detroit, the riots are about augmentation, of course, the police have a police version of the robot you were fighting before. That's kinda cool. There's a point being made here by the reuse of an enemy from other parts of the game. You're literally seeing an enemy, but on the side of the cops. I mean, they got this idea from the original Deus Ex when you started seeing rebranded versions of mechs you'd seen before, but still, the game is saying, hey, maybe it's bad the police have tanks. They're arresting tons of people in the street too. But this is set dressing for the fact a riot is happening because people don't like augmentation. The commentary isn't, boy, the police really are making a bad situation worse by taking to the streets with automatic shotguns and fucking Tachicomas. The commentary is, wow, things are really heating up about this augmentation thing, huh? The cops really have their hands full with all these crazy rioters. The game respects the cops so much you get hired to help them out during the same level where they're arresting everyone using a rocket mech. You can see what I mean, right? This is okay as far as writing for a video game goes, but terrible as far as writing a story goes. It really doesn't help that it feels like a few key steps of the story got cut out due to time limitations. In the second to last level, it's established that all the major characters from the plot can't be contacted because they're currently en route to a sea base in the middle of the Arctic Ocean. This travel time is important. Jensen then encounters Zhao Yunru, the lady who tricked him earlier, who introduces the boss fight with the bioship reveal. Then it turns out Jensen needs to get to the Arctic Ocean base everyone else went to stop the conspiracy happening there now, at which point it conveniently turns out there's a special person-sized rocket here which can launch him to the other side of the world faster than anyone's ever traveled anywhere on Earth before. So he goes there, and Zhao Yunru's there already. She got here before you, and she's the final boss.
Keep going.
Hang on a second. How did you get here? Was there a second rocket stashed away somewhere? Can you give me the cliff notes on what is happening here? No wonder the last level takes place in a giant hole. Presumably, in an earlier draft, there was a level or two between these, creating a time gap where it was plausible for Zhao Yunru to get to the middle of the Arctic Ocean. When you land in the ocean in the cutscene, you just spawn on a landing pad next to all these helicopters, where I assume you were going to get dropped off for a sensible reason in an earlier draft of the story. Or maybe they just didn't care to explain this. I mean, Jensen doesn't even look for her before he leaves. She fucks up Jensen's augmentations, walks off screen, and he forgets she exists. Men never fail to forget where women are in physical space. Instead of building to some larger question, it builds towards a comical, over-the-top video game zombie movie climax. The big reveal of the plot is that the Illuminati are figuring out a way to control people using their augmentations. Then one of them goes rogue and presses a button that makes everyone with an augmentation go insane. He does this to make a point about augmentations being bad. Adam Jensen, who didn't get the replacement chip, or did but got an injection of nanomachines, so he's fine, that's the explanation they give, saves the day by flying to Ground Zero and turning it off. This is a waste of the potentially realistic and interesting ways you could have taken this story. Instead of seriously exploring the problems with centralization or authorities like governments having control over your life, it settles for the much less deep question, would it be bad if the Illuminati hacked your grandmother's hip replacement and made her into a killing machine? And the answer to that question, shockingly enough, is, yeah, that would be quite bad. But that's not science fiction or cyberpunk or transhumanism or discussing the implications of future technology. That's just stupid. You haven't told a story about power and control. You wrote a cartoon about how bad it would be if there was a big button that killed everyone. You're not presenting a nuanced issue here. You can most easily identify the core problems with the storytelling and how the game reuses ideas that were in the original, but in the complete opposite way. Okay, so in Deus Ex, one of the big things about the Illuminati and their offshoot, MJ-12, is they're super pretentious. No one names their AI algorithms Morpheus or Daedalus unless they like the smell of their own farts. Like, MJ-12's organizational structure and clearance levels are types of angel arranged in order of closeness to the throne of God, with the top one being literally God clearance, and the one below it being seraphic, like as in seraphim. The founder of MJ-12 MJ12 is writing Bible fanfiction and casting himself as God. This isn't just a piece of lore or meant to sound cool. This is a joke. Bob Page, the guy who started MJ12, doesn't really understand the teachings of the Illuminati and thinks he's a genius. So to sound clever, he named the structure of his organization around stuff he thought sounded deep. Seraphic? Wow, I'm so smart. I'm a philosopher. I'm fucking Play 2. Page named the special AI he wanted to use to take over the world Icarus. This is a joke. He's trying to sound cool and it's really silly. Like New Vegas with its Caesar cosplayer, Deus Ex is making fun of how stupid it is to try to sound clever by making surface references to stuff people think is deep. Cue Human Revolution, which bases a shit ton of its imagery around the myth of Icarus because it sounds deep.
We need to get to the top of these crystals.
I never asked for this.
Augmentation is like Icarus's wax wings, and the sun represents, augmentation turning out to be bad. Look, I don't mean any offense to people who thought this was clever when this trailer came out. Demographically speaking, you were 15. I'm merely giving you the opportunity to consider that this might just look smart, while not actually saying anything remotely relevant or useful about the world we live in. And this shit is omnipresent throughout the game. The first Icarus thing you see is the very first thing you see in the game. The slow fall augmentation is called the Icarus Landing System. There's a book you can read in the game called Building Wings. The game's title theme on the soundtrack is called Icarus, of course. The tie-in novel for the game was named Deus Ex Icarus Effect. And then the tie-in novel had a tie-in game for phones and later the PC called Deus Ex The Fall, because, you know, Icarus falling into the sea, which happens to the character in the game too. That sounds familiar. Oh wait, because it also happens to Adam, both in the game and then afterwards in the ending. He falls into the sea again then. In this world, everyone is Icarus, drowning in the sea of this symbolism. The Fall was going to have a slightly subtler title to begin with. According to unused images in the game's files, they were going to call it Icarus Rising. And like, I hope I'm not the first person to point this out for you, but Sarif Industries' logo is just a fucking wing, and Tai Yong Medical, their antagonist, their levels are all sun-themed. Look, the sun is coming from both sides of the room at once because it's like they're bathed in the sun. You know, Icarus's natural enemy or something. Tai Yong is named that because that's the Chinese phrase for the sun. They wanted to continue their sun-Icarus metaphor, so they googled the sun in Chinese. Sarif is a deliberate pun on seraphim. Deus Ex literally made a joke about people who think referencing the seraphim is clever. This is the shit Bob Page would come up with if you made him write a Deus Ex game. Even the man responsible explained